So we talked about how the scam systems work. What can DNS do for this? Because if DNS is the underlying infrastructure for most of this, you and your threat intelligence team, how do you use that to be able to not just respond to each individual scam because there's too many, it's too dynamic? How do you shift to a model which is more preemptive? You can actually go in there and preemptively block. You talk a bit about the tactics that you use to try and understand the infrastructure and preemptively block it.
Okay. So, I mean, like I said earlier, one of the advantages to attackers of DNS is that they can, build and then tear down cheaply, quickly, going after different domains, individual domains, because domains can change.
Yeah.
Like that's the whole point with the flexibility of DNS is the domains can change hyper rapidly. Mm-hmm. Domain generation algorithms obviously will enable that to scale as well. So you can't just go after individual domains. I can't give away all the secret sauce, obviously, but what I will say is that obviously DNS is it's a record-based system, and the information in DNS records can act as a kind of an infrastructure fingerprint of sorts. So what we do is we look at the behaviors of the attackers and how they're actually using DNS, and that, together with a fair amount of clustering, helps us to identify individual actors that are operating within the DNS space, looking at the infrastructure that they're actually using, and then monitoring them and tracking them as they evolve based on the behaviors that they have in DNS. So we're not going after individual domains, although obviously protection against the domain.
Right. So it's kind of like the way to think of it is rather than trying to shoot down millions of drones, you're trying to take out the infrastructure of the drone factory so that essentially you're preemptive the use of the scam, because I guess the threat actors, they have to set up this infrastructure first before they can launch the scams.
Right.
And I think on average, based on our researchers, and keep me honest, it was around typically between when the DNS infrastructure is originally set up and when the scams are launched, it on average is about 68 days. So if we're able to understand that infrastructure and we know it's owned by that threat actor, we can block it in advance. So before it gets weaponized, we can essentially do the blocking. Is that a good way to characterize it?
Yeah, I mean, there's more than one way to skin a cat. Obviously, the strategic aging of domains is a way of being able to try and build some kind of reputation of credibility, because a domain that's been around for years and years and years obviously seems to be well established and generally won't be treated as something that's going to be obviously suspicious. So we do see that, of course, but we also see the kind of hyper rapid registration and then immediate weaponization of domains as well. So there's a number of techniques that are used, but yeah, I think, around 60 days between first seeing the domain and us ultimately classifying it and then seeing that domain weaponized with a threat, I think is about. With cybercrime and cybersecurity being a very critical issue, obviously, that's what we're all doing here, but particularly for governments around the world, DNS being so important as we've been talking about, can you talk more about protective DNS, what it is, give some examples?
Yeah. So protective DNS is when you take a DNS infrastructure and rather than essentially just resolving any domain that a user tries to access, you actually make sure you check to see they should be going there. So right now, most DNS servers are complicit in the crime. Your user clicks on a phishing link and says, I want to go to badguy.com. Traditional DNS servers go, sure, no problem, it's over there. That's not what you want. So with protective DNS, you take threat intelligence, put it onto a DNS server, and then when they try and resolve domains that are malicious or inappropriate or whatever the reason against policy, you can essentially block it. So protective DNS from a government point of view really covers in two flavors. You see governmental PDNS. So here in the UK, NCSC operate a protective DNS that protects the National Health Service, central local government, some schools as well. Australia, US also do the same. The US actually transitioned from racking and stacking loads of firewalls to protect the civilian government and actually now use a protective DNS. So there is a government or public sector PDNS, really protecting government and critical infrastructure. What you also have is national PDNSs. So a national PDNS is where you take the threat intelligence and you put it onto the ISP infrastructure. And that is normally to protect the citizens. So some good examples, like in Ukraine, obviously they have a problem with their neighbor to the east. They deployed threat intelligence on the ISPs in Ukraine. In the first month, the financial impact on Ukrainian citizens from fraud and scams coming from Russia dropped by 30%. Latvia, who were at Cyber UK last month, Biba Kashkina, she runs over there. In 3 months, they blocked 2.5 billion malicious queries. So it really provides an incredibly scalable way to mitigate scams and fraud. And obviously, they're doing it on infrastructure that already exists. Every network has a DNS infrastructure. The service providers run DNS infrastructure. So it's a great way to be able to essentially provide cybersecurity at scale.
So in addition to protective DNS, what else can organizations do to reduce risk to their organization? So things like hygiene, lookalikes, things like that.
So some other thing is like DNS is, with protective DNS, potentially a huge asset, and it should be part of your cybersecurity stack. However, quite a lot of organizations don't do a particularly good job when it comes to actually raising the bar, making it harder for threat actors. A good example is around protecting their own domains. So from a brand point of view. So what we see organizations do is they set up DNS domains for their public website. When they no longer need it anymore, they don't re-register it. So what do threat actors do? Go, well, this domain has existed on the internet from a reputable company. It's been there for 10 years. Well, if you don't want it, I'll have it. All the threat actor has to do is basically go to a registrar and register that domain. And what are they going to do? They're going to take that brand and use it in a phishing campaign, targeting that brand's customers or potentially other organizations. So in the Netherlands, the most common target is the postal service. In Morocco, for whatever reason, it's the traffic fine system, apparently. Everyone's petrified of getting done for traffic violations. But unfortunately, in a lot of those cases, the organizations who own the brands don't properly secure their domains. And so for a threat actor, you're basically giving them like a free hit pretty much. So you'll see in a lot of these DNS security best practices, organizations need to at least secure their DNS domains, check for lookalikes to see people impersonating them, and then use protective DNS to block access to it, and ideally get those domains taken down. Implementing DNS hygiene like an actual proper life cycle for their own domains. If you're not, you're simply aiding and abetting these cyber criminals. You're making their life a lot easier.
Okay. So if that's so important, or if all of this is so important, then do you expect governments and regulators to insist on protective DNS or DNS security best practices like NIST and NIST2?
So that's already happening. So last month, April of this year, the US government published NIST Special Publication 881. It's a very sexy title. That is the US government's guidance on DNS security. We expect at some point for that to be mandated for federal agencies in the US. We work with the European Union. If you happen to be regulated under NIST2, DNS security is going to become a requirement that you're going to need to adhere to. So that involves making sure that the DNS is resilient, that you've got the DNS hygiene, and you use protective DNS. So I see more and more regulators around the world who are starting to take those NIST best practices, putting them into their regulations. Most recently in Singapore, even for their AI policy. So for secure AI in Singapore, they've actually added the mandate for protective DNS and the NIST best practices as part of their foundational policy for having a secure AI infrastructure.
So for the audience, what are the first 2 or 3 steps that you would advise taking to build a program that combines DNS telemetry, protective DNS, and external partner engagement into some kind of repeatable playbook? So
the 3 things I'll start with, as I said, the DNS hygiene is, unfortunately, not everyone knows who owns DNS security. They quite often assume it's the network guy who owns it. And so it tends to fall between the cracks. So the first thing you should do is think about, what is your DNS hygiene policy across your estate? That's really step number 1. The second part is actually integrating DNS into your cybersecurity control points. If you think about it, DNS gives you ubiquitous visibility and control. Literally anywhere you have an asset, it will use DNS to resolve other services. Public cloud, private cloud, on-prem, roaming users, anywhere you go, you're going to use DNS. So turn it from just a networking platform into a cybersecurity asset, and that's where protective DNS comes in. But it's not just about doing the blocking. Crucially, it's also the data that is sitting in those DNS platforms. If you are unfortunate enough to have a breach, the data and the network context in those DNS servers are invaluable. How are you supposed to correlate events from multiple platforms if basically the way you identify that like an asset is based on an IP address? You pick up your laptop, you root from this side of the room to the other, you're suddenly a different IP address. How do you know you're correlating the right information? Well, you need the DHCP leases for that, and that's sitting in typically your DNS platform. If you do get a breach, the obvious question, CISOs don't get fired for breaches. They get fired when someone says, well, what was the scope of the breach? And they're like, I don't know. Well, you can know because the DNS query response data will tell you everything this compromised device tried to access. It is a wonderful audit trail for all the activities that's happening from that particular device. So the telemetry part is equally as important as necessarily the blocking as well.
Nice.
So I think we might be out of time. You might think, well, okay, how secure is my environment? We've been speaking about DNS hygiene. We also offer security workshops. So we can come in, work with your networking team and your security team and take you through and give you a bit of an audit check to see how well do you fare on the scale of cybersecurity as it relates to DNS. So with that, thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it. Thanks.